Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to Starfleet Tactical. I'm Pat. With me is Chris tonight. I'm going to be hosting again. Alec is in the process of moving, and we all know how much fun and enjoyment a person gets out of moving. So he's a little busy tonight. So having done it like 8 times in the last 10 years, I get it. So anyways, it's just Chris and I tonight. Hope everyone's had a great week. And Chris, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. Just been working out on doing house maintenance and stuff all day today. So it's been very exciting. So as far away as you can get from spaceships and science fiction.
How's the deck coming along?
So well, it's coming along okay. So we're slowly making progress. So lots of measuring, cutting wood, nailing it in, all that kind of happy stuff, So throwing a little rain and it's great. So let's see here. So when last we left the intrepid Chris Weave last week, he was getting started on a discussion. Comes from shoot, I'm blanking.
So you're thinking of the Winchell Chung piece,
yes.
So yeah, I was going to talk to. I actually moved some stuff around in the slide deck. And then Alec told us he wasn't going to be here after all, and so we're going to, I think, skip the warps. I think it makes sense to skip the warp speed discussion until Alec's available for that.
Oh, sure, absolutely, absolutely.
But so I'm trying to think of if there's anything else I want to start off with before we jump right into doing all that other stuff. I want to say that there was something, and I can't remember what it was. I'm looking here to see who we've got on. It looks like I see a lot of the usual suspects. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing okay tonight. So it looks like we got 19 people watching, and it's looking pretty good. So I was looking to see if Michael Weir is posting. Somebody asked where the cat is. He was up here earlier.
We actually have 72 watching across 6 different channels. You are only seeing the YouTube one.
6 channels?
Okay.
Yeah, so we're on my Facebook page. We're on the Axanar Facebook page. We're on the Axanar fan group Facebook page. The Axanar, the Star Trek Facebook page sponsored by Axanar. We're on Axanar YouTube, and we're on the Aries Studios YouTube channel. So that's 6 different broadcasts being broadcasted to 6 different places. And I can even tell you, we've got 3 watching on my page, 2 on the Star Trek page, 2 on the Axanar fan group, 12 on the Axanar Facebook page, 26 on the Axanar YouTube channel, and 20 on the Aries Studio YouTube channel. So
wow.
There you go. That's how good this StreamYard software is, that it tells us that. So you got 75 people watching, so I'm going to get out of here.
Give or take.
So somebody said something like, oh, Alec is here. And I think what's going on is he's packing, but he's around in case there's a technical issue, etc. But he's frantically packing comic books and stuff. So he asked Pat to take over the sort of mundane duties of being the host. And so that works out okay. So, so all right, I didn't realize that there were that many channels. I thought StreamYard was limited to 3 channels, but it turns out that's not true. It does way more than that, which is good to know. Good to know.
Yeah, definitely.
So all right, so let's see. I was gonna go through some interesting things I pulled off of Winchell Chung's website. So I'm gonna go ahead to bring up the PowerPoint and do that. And then let me share my screen. Okay, I always forget the last step, which is I have to click on. Okay, I'm clicking. It's not letting me share.
Huh. That's interesting.
All right, let me try again. I'd be willing to bet that that's something that Alec has to turn on.
Oh, yeah. I guess if someone's the...
Can you share receive? Okay.
Give me the ability to share. There we go.
I'm just packing comic books.
All right. So we started this last week. Hold on a second. There we go. Last week, I sort of showed that here the topics that I had sort of keyed up for last week. Of course, there was no way we were going to get it through all of that. We already did this, which was the useful observation from GDW's Star Cruiser about the tactical combat being about targeting. It's the nature of tactical combat, which is like I said, it's a very interesting little essay. And it's worth, if you go look for Star Cruiser design notes, you should be able to find it on the internet, because I put it on the internet like literally 20 years ago, and it's been up there ever since. So the next thing I was going to suggest was talking about warp speed, but let's do that when Alec's available to be part of the conversation.
Okay.
So instead, let's talk about Winchell Chung's ship design triangle graphs. So where this is coming from is the fact that when you're talking about surface ship design, and I will make the argument that this applies to universes like Star Trek also, that's a more general thing than just surface ship design, that it's commonly thought of that there's a trade-off between three different things for a warship. There's a trade-off between the amount of mass, the amount of displacement that you devote to propulsion, the amount that you devote to weapons, and the amount that you devote to defensive technology, which in the case of surface ships usually means armor, but it can also mean things like torpedo blisters when you start getting to the point of torpedo defenses, and compartmentalization, and all the sorts of things that keep your ship afloat when somebody's trying to make it not be afloat. So, so it's not just, like how thick the armor is. Now, these obviously are not everything that goes into ship design. For instance, there's nothing in there that talks about fuel. So there's nothing in there that talks about endurance or habitability, et cetera. And all those things are very important, right? If you go back and you look at the World War I naval arms race between the Brits and the Germans, one of the things the Brits sort of discovered after the war, they always sort of wondered, like, how were the Germans able to get the level of performance out of the ships they've got? Well, the answer is that the German High Seas Fleet would have been more properly called the German North Seas Fleet, because they really designed a navy that was designed to be a garrison force, not spend a whole lot of time at sea, go out for a couple of weeks tops and then come back. Whereas the Brits had worldwide commitments. So they needed to design ships that could go to the other side of the world and have their crews living on the ships for 6 months, 8 months at a time. The Germans never had any expectation that anybody would live on their ships for that long. And so at least their main battle fleet. And as a result of that, they were able to do things like put the machinery tighter together because they weren't expecting to have to undergo maintenance at sea while in rough weather. They used boilers that really needed to be taken offline to be cleaned, for longer periods of time than the British boilers. The ships they had less space per person. They were just a lot less habitable, and they had a big shore establishment that could come onto the ships to help do maintenance and stuff like that. So they were able to sort of cram more into the same amount of displacement, whereas the Brits had the exact opposite problem. They could expect that any of their ships could be sent to the other side of the world. So you might make the argument that this really should include things like habitability and endurance, bunkerage, how much fuel do you carry on board, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, maybe. I think you can kind of get the same idea by sort of subtracting that off the front. I'm not sure that from a simple perspective that it helps to add those things in as other things that you're graphing. But it might be worth trying to do that sometime. I may ask Winch if he's ever taken a stab at doing a 4-sided graph. The 3-sided graph works quite nicely, though. So as you can see,
well, the only thing I'd say is just these are just your tactical considerations.
Yeah, these are just the tactical considerations.
The other things go towards, obviously, endurance, range, all that kind of stuff, or to other functions. So this graph might be the amount of tonnage that the ship devotes to these 3 things.
Yeah, and if you're talking about a universe like Traveler, for instance, I mean, and you're talking about a battle rider, that other stuff is actually physically a different ship, right? If you're talking about, this also, like a monitor wouldn't really have any endurance, right? Monitors are intended to be coastal or even harbor monitors, and as a result, you don't have to worry about including that other stuff. But then again, you could include that on a graph if it had more axes. I haven't really played around with any graphs that have more axes more than triangles. I have used triangles in a couple of situations, like a paper I wrote in grad school about how do you game some Clausewitzian things. That was sort of a think piece I wrote in grad school. But as you can see, the way that you read this is for any given value, you can choose between 0 and 100%, but wherever you are on that graph, limits on any particular axis limits what's the totals on the other axes can be, right? So if you're at the very top at 100% on propulsion, then you're at 0% on defenses and you're at 0% on weapons, right? So you've got something that's very fast but totally unarmed and, with no armor whatsoever. Likewise, if you've got, you could have 0 on propulsion and say 50% on weapons and 50% on defenses, in which case you've just described a fort. So, because it's not something that's going to move, right? So that concrete battleship in Manila Bay shows up in that place on that graph. So this is, I think, it's a very useful way of sort of visualizing this. So let me go to the next slide.
And the only other thing I would say is, I think this also is actually kind of useful if you were describing, say, the power allocation on a ship in combat. How much of your power are you putting towards defenses? How much to weapons? How much to movement? And that assumes each of those systems could handle 100% of your power. But yeah. Yeah,
in fact, I hadn't even thought about that. But if anything, this works better for something like Star Trek, like Starfleet, a Starfleet Battles type game where you're allocating power. You could basically, you could have this as being your control panel, as a very simple control panel.
Exactly.
You could also limit certain ranges as what your tactical or what your design doctrine is. In fact, we'll get onto that a little bit farther down. So what are some of the implications of this? So let's take a look at this, right? So if you're looking at this one, within a given propulsion range, you can, if you're in one half of the triangle, you've got more defense and weapons, on the other half, more weapons and defense. You can do this for all of the axes based upon which one you're looking at. So like if you hold within a given, if you're looking at weapons, you get one particular set of triangles, etc. So you can use this as sort of a visual aid to help sort of balance this out. Let me go ahead and go to the next one. And the thing that I think is more interesting, which is that the one on the right, which sort of, helps you understand exactly where you are in any given thing. So you can sort of say like, okay, I don't care if this thing is slow, right? In which case you kind of want to be down in the bottom half of it. Or, I want something that's offensively very powerful, but I don't expect that it's going to have to be very robust, in which case you sort of stay away from that lower left-hand triangle. So let me go on to the next slide. So the one on the left is sort of expanding that analysis a little bit, and it's listing the 3 attributes in their order of priority based upon that particular thing. So if you're in that sort of light green one in the towards the top left, propulsion is greater than defense, defense is greater than weapons. If you're down a little bit, defense is greater than propulsion, and propulsion is greater than weapons. So it's what you get when you sort of overlay those triangles. And that gives you some idea of where you might be. With the next one, next couple, let's go ahead and go to this one. This breaks this down even further. Now, the one thing that Winch doesn't do, which I think is potentially a useful thing to do, and which I want to do at some point, is to sort of try to take a look at both real-world ships and science fiction ships and see if I can put them on those charts by kind of like notional ship type. You could use this to define ship types if you were for breaking down ships. What's the difference between a battle cruiser and a battleship? It's not size. The battle cruisers and the battleships were about the same size. In fact, in the British fleet, the battle cruisers were a little bit bigger. The difference was that they traded armor for propulsion plants. Like the British battle cruisers, the one class of British battle cruisers had twice as many boilers as the same generation of British battleships. And so you could easily sort of map that for any given size against these charts, and you could even go so far as to sort of define a doctrine based on that. Like if you're creating a background for a science fiction novel or some other property, if it fits in this category, these people call it a such and such sort of stuff. And I'll notice that, in this one, he sort of makes the categories a little bit broader. Like there's that big balance area in the section where you can still have more of one and less of the other, right? So it's defined by the 50% mark on all 3 values, but you can't have all 3 values be 50%, obviously. You have to sort of, it goes from what, 25% to 25 to 50? Mm-hmm. So that doesn't make, you could have 25, 25, and 50. So so that adds up to 100. Okay. In fact, if you had 50, you'd have to have 25 and 25 to be in that triangle.
Yeah, so, if you're right in the middle triangle, you're going to be 30, 30, 40 on those items.
Yeah. So, let's see. I think that's all I had for that. Let me take a look at the questions here. Scott Voigt says propulsion shouldn't look at just raw speed, but also how well it can maneuver. Harder to hit something that is both fast and constantly changing its vector. Yeah, that's true. That's very very true the farther back in time you go. One of the things that sort of differentiates Star Trek combat, and one of the reasons why you may recall a couple of weeks ago that I said that I thought that Star Trek combat, Star Trek ships were more like pre-dreadnoughts than they were like dreadnoughts, in terms of how that all works. One of the reasons why I think that is that over time, Star Trek ships are really designed in such a way that they hit often, right? So it's a lot more like they're firing quick firing guns than like they're firing large weapons, because Star Trek, naval combat in sort of the dreadnought era was defined by you don't hit very much, but when you do, they feel it. Mm-hmm. This was really sort of most Star Trek combat is more along the lines of you're constantly hitting their shields. You may not be getting through their shields, but you're constantly bouncing stuff off of their shields. That happens all the time. And so I think that in Star Trek, with all the ability of the computers to do auto-targeting, et cetera, you actually, maneuvering doesn't seem to help you a whole lot. It helps you a little bit.
But they do say evasive maneuvers often.
They do say evasive maneuvers, and you sort of get the impression that at least I get the impression that with evasive maneuvers, they only hit 80% of the time.
Right.
As opposed to 100%.
It probably just means occasionally they're going to miss sometimes,
The most effective tool you can have working on your side is clearly plot armor. But as it is, it seems like they really do hit a lot in Star Trek. Less so in other properties. Some, like you see a lot of misses in Star Wars. But you also, everything seems to be sort of manually aimed, so that doesn't surprise me.
Right. So within each of those three categories, it's not just, raw weaponry. You're going to have probably whatever power required or resources are required. If you're talking about ship construction, tonnage, space, towards things like sensors, targeting computers, the weapons themselves, any ammunition, if that's a thing that they have. So it's going to be more than just the gun barrel firing off whatever weapon it is. Likewise, weapon defenses is going to be, if you've got shields, armor in your thing, probably the construction or durability of the hull by itself. And that would also include things like jamming ability, maybe cloaking devices, all of those things. So there's a whole host of, and then like he said, with propulsion, the ability to turn and change your vector, accelerate, decelerate, all those things. So it's more than just those three items. There are going to be subsets within each of those three categories.
Yeah. There's a lot of things are implied by a particular item. And if you use the word if you throw the word effective on top of it, it could be effective defenses. You could change weapons to offenses, although, some of those weapons are defensive, like anti-aircraft guns. Things get, you can have the biggest gun in the world, but if you've got another gun that you're more likely to hit with, you probably want to choose the one you're more likely to hit with. Mm-hmm. So,
well, and wasn't it? And I don't remember specifically, but I think in the night battles in the Solomons during World War II, Guadalcanal fighting against the Tokyo Express. Wasn't it determined that at least especially when you're not talking about battleships, you're talking about destroyers and, light cruisers, very lightly armored vessels, that scoring at least some hits mattered more than the killing, and degrading them over time mattered a little more than scoring the killing blow in those particular cases. Because at those times they were fighting at night. They were fighting in a way that they hadn't really planned on fighting as much. The Japanese had planned on fighting more than the Americans, at night using hit and run attacks and stuff like that. So
the night battles of Guadalcanal are really interesting. In fact, all of the early battles in World War II in the Pacific are really interesting, because one of the things that people really, really forget is that these guys, it would be a little inaccurate to say they were making it up as they go along, but everybody went into that war with, as oftentimes happens in war, everybody went into that war with doctrine that was largely theoretical.
Mm-hmm.
They really didn't have any real good experience on what worked and what didn't. And if you go back to Wayne Hughes's Fleet Tactics book, there's this thing where he does this calculation that basically is, okay, here's what they did in those early battles, and what can we infer by what they thought their weapons effectiveness was on the basis of what they did. And he basically comes to the conclusion that they originally thought that it took about half a carrier deck load to take out an enemy carrier.
Mm-hmm.
But as a practical matter, it was more along the lines of it took 2 carrier deck loads to take out an enemy carrier. Because it was just in actual combat, it was a lot harder to put ordnance on target than everybody assumed it was. When you're being shot at, it's harder to do it than, like all that time when you're like shooting at targets, the targets aren't shooting back at you, right? When you're shooting at practice targets, the practice targets don't shoot back. So what happens if the practice targets are shooting back?
Well, and in the Japanese case especially, the practice targets maneuvered expertly to avoid things like dive bombers and torpedo planes. They were very good at it because their doctrine, which turned out to be not quite as effective overall, but their doctrine meant that their carriers would maneuver. They would depend on maneuvering to avoid damage instead of anti-aircraft fire to avoid incoming damage, more so than the Americans. Americans tended to keep a tight formation and utilize their ships nearby, put up a heavier wall of anti-aircraft fire to minimize damage.
Somebody was asking about the cat. So he came and he was clearly wanting, he was giving me the look, which means either pick me up or I'm going to come up and pester you anyway. So I might as well pick him up. I don't know if you've ever seen the Battle 360 TV series that
I have.
That first season that was about the USS Enterprise. There was a lot of things that I didn't fully appreciate until I saw it in that.
Was there more than just one season?
They did a Patton 360.
Oh, that one. Okay. All right. Yep.
So, but the Battle 360 was really interesting when they did the USS Enterprise. The 3 things that came out of that was, like all those battles were really close together and they were just trying to figure out what worked and what didn't. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it was really personal for those guys, because that wasn't just the Japanese they were fighting. These were the assholes we fought last month. Right. And so there was lots of,
right.
We want to get those guys back for what they did to us last month.
Yeah.
And the third thing was, just like real estate, it's all about location. In Coral Sea, I think it was, one of the U.S. carriers was like a mile closer to the Japanese along the axis of attack. And as a result, every Japanese strike came in and went, oh, look, a carrier, and wailed on it. And Enterprise was just sitting back there with nobody molesting it. Everybody was attacking the other carrier just because it happened to be a mile closer.
Yep. Yeah, luck matters.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Joseph, Alec is listening, but he's busy packing. So he's available if we have a technical problem, but other than that, he's busy packing. So let's see. I'm looking at what else. Yeah, the cat really is kind of the boss around here. I was going to try to push back on that statement for a second, but given that he woke me up 3 times this week at 3:30 in the morning or earlier, I think he really does run the show. Although he mostly let me sleep this morning, which is good. So let's.
I'm just looking through for any questions and stuff myself here.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that too. So.
Yeah, they talked about the long land. Someone mentions the long lance torpedo. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know as a whole, a tremendous amount, but the Japanese had one major advantage that the United States didn't count on in World War II, and that was called the long lance torpedo. And they would use it on their surface ships. And it had tremendously long range by comparison to any American torpedo, and a bigger warhead. I believe, at times it could pretty much knock out a cruiser with one hit, certainly a destroyer. And so the Americans were, lining up in gun line formation and stuff like that. We were and the Japanese would come in under cover of darkness. And we had radar, but we really weren't that good with it just yet. The Battle of Savo Island, if anyone's interested in looking up, a real disaster. This was early after we had just landed in Guadalcanal. Battle of Savo Island, the Japanese came in at night in the dark. They drove right past the picket ship we had guarding a particular channel there. And it was basically a giant drive-by shooting. And they would launch the torpedoes before firing the guns. And, so sometimes the first time anybody, and then to add to the confusion, the Americans infrequently thought that they were, it was friendly fire, and it was all a mistake. It's a real complex disaster. So there's plenty of books and stories about it for anybody who's interested. I'm sure there's even a YouTube video or two on it, but about those night battles. But if you want to learn about some interesting tactics and how people adapted to a changing tactical situation, they would try to take some lessons learned from the previous battle and get a little bit better at it. So very fascinating, very interesting set of battles to read about if anybody's interested.
It's worth noting that Long Lance is a name that was made up by Morrison when he wrote his history. The Japanese, it's not a translation of a Japanese term. He wanted something to differentiate those torpedoes from like regular torpedoes. The other thing is that the Japanese were convinced that we were using oxygen torpedoes that had an oxygen oxidizer, like a liquid oxygen oxidizer. We weren't. We concluded that was impossible as a practical matter. The Japanese quote unquote, knew that we had done it, and so concluded it wasn't impossible, and so they did it. But it's really dangerous. It's really dangerous.
So you're talking about the propulsion that the Long Lance eventually used.
Yes,
developed something that we hadn't done, but they had concluded we had done it.
Yeah, and so by virtue of the fact that we had done it, they knew that it was possible, so they were able to figure it out.
Wow, see, paranoia can be useful, can't it?
Yeah, the power of positive thinking. But those torpedoes were really dangerous. As somebody pointed out in the chat, those torpedoes were really dangerous to have on your ship, because they were very, very, very even more dangerous than a regular torpedo was. And so you really wanted to get rid of those things as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Same is true, by the way, for all of our torpedoes too. Like we were firing these good sized torpedoes. We'll have like a five cluster centerline cluster, and we'd fire them off to one side or the other. Those things you really kind of wanted to get rid of them before you started taking gunfire coming in.
Mm-hmm. Are there any cases? Have you heard of any cases where basically gunfire hit a torpedo and detonated it? Was that ever an issue?
Yes. Yeah. I want to say. Somebody said the Japanese lost a cruiser that way. I know, which sounds familiar to me. I think we maybe lost a destroyer that way, or had some destroyers that had some serious issues. because something like that had happened. And that practice largely went away after the war. Largely went away. Let's see. I'm trying to think of if there's anything more to be said about this. Going back to talking about, effective weapons and things like that, it's kind of, I'll probably go and talk more about this at some point in a future show, because there's a presentation that I'm putting together about some of the works of a guy named Karl Lautenschlager, who did a couple of really interesting essays in the 1980s. He was an analyst, maybe still is, as far as I know, at Los Alamos, and he did a couple of naval-oriented essays. And in one of them, he makes the comment about how one of the things that sort of differentiated the dreadnought battleships from previous generations is that the things that made them special were not immediately observable to the outside world. So it's really kind of hard to see fire control, right? You can see some of it to know what you're looking for, but you can't really tell if it's got a gunnery computer. And it's, when you compare an older ship and a newer ship, you can look at it and go, wow, that one's got a lot bigger gun and it's a lot bigger ship. But the real thing that differentiated the original dreadnought generation wasn't things like that, because all of the tools that made dreadnought so incredibly spectacular had all been available for, they'd all been in one fleet or another for 10 years. The issue wasn't a technological breakthrough. The breakthrough was the systems engineering piece that put all of those things together in one platform. So if you've got them separately, you're okay, but you put together centralized fire control and salvo firing and continuous aim and modern range finding and this and that, et cetera, you get this huge increase in capability. And that sort of stuff is really kind of hard to see from the outside. Think about most Star Trek ships. If you're just looking at them, can you really spot where the phasers are? Well, kind of, but could you at range? No. Luckily, sensors in the Star Trek universe can tell you what the captain had to eat for that morning. So nobody in the Star Trek universe really seems to be information deprived.
True.
Yeah, it's very rare for them to say, Captain, I can't get anything. I'm sorry, I got nothing for you.
There was a battle where the Defiant was fighting a Klingon ship, and Cisco did the usual, hey, target their weapons and engines kind of thing. And at some point, Worf chimes up and says, yeah, restricting our fire is not turning out to be all that effective. So I assume there is some form of, let's say, firepower loss by trying to do very specific targeting. Somehow perhaps the weapons aren't quite as effective. Maybe you tend to miss a little more often when you're trying to hit a real specific spot on a maneuvering ship.
Or it might just be that you're not taking shots.
Right. You're waiting until that system you're trying to hit is, presented to you in a good way, or maybe you're just not shooting as much by restricting your fire. So
if I've got an AR-15 and I'm not actually aiming, I can probably get off more rounds than if I am aiming.
Yep.
Okay, I had this idea that I was going to try to pull up a couple of images and show something, but I'm going to hold off on that because I've come to the conclusion that it's probably too hard for me to do while I'm, So I got while we're talking. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've just got a couple minor things that people might be interested in. They don't have to do with Star Trek, but they are in the spaceship combat area. First, there's a game on Steam called Battlestar Galactica Deadlock for anybody who's a fan of that. And it takes you through the first Cylon War. It's got multiple campaigns and downloadable content and all that kind of stuff. Very great, very good game, very tactically interesting, pretty well balanced. Apparently, they even run tournaments and stuff like that online. But they just came out with one of their final downloadable content game or additions to the game, and it includes the modern ships. So you can go all the way up to the Mark 7 Viper and the modern Cylon Raiders. They added in the Pegasus, the Mercury class Battlestar, which is the Pegasus, and the Valkyrie class Battlestars, in addition to the modern Cylon base ship that we see in the Ronald D. Moore version, and an additional base ship and all that. So they've taken you up all the way from the first Cylon War all the way up to modern times. You've got like 15 ships on each for each faction to play around with. So anyways, it's very, very fun, interesting, tactically interesting game to play around with sometime for anybody who's interested in that. The other one that's coming out next week is Star Wars Squadrons. So for any old timers who were back in college who might have been a fan of the old X-Wing game, this will be X-Wing with real good movie clips and real good playability. The research I've done for it says that it's a simulation game. So it's not Star Wars Battlefront. It's not an arcade game. It appears to be an actual simulation that has, at least including more, all the different features that were in the original X-Wing game from way back when. So those are the new computer games that are out that people might be interested in.
Okay. So there's a Star Wars thing that's billed as a simulation.
Yes. It's not an arcade game.
Okay.
It's more of a flight simulator than an arcade game.
Okay. All right. Roger that.
Whereas an arcade game just kind of, you point left or point right and press the fire button as often as you can and all that kind of stuff. In this game, you apparently have to you toggle all three things on your triangle there. You toggle the power to your weapons, your shields, and your propulsion. So it actually operates on Chris's chart that he uses, that he just displayed tonight. So see, we've come full circle. Yeah, I mean, I was a little skeptical there of anything in Star Wars being a simulation. It's a simulation of Star Wars. So for anyone who's into that sort of thing. But did you ever play the old X-Wing game?
No, I did not.
Tremendous amounts of fun.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me. It's just I'm a little skeptical.
This should be better. It apparently even supports virtual VR headsets, all that kind of stuff too. So,
I frequently say I'm a naval analyst. If I see a Navy, I analyze it.
Yes,
I don't analyze Star Wars. I just don't. That way madness lies.
Right.
So I stopped doing that a while ago.
Yeah. So it's pretty much World War II in space, right? At best. So anyways, that's those are all the announcement I have. So for anybody who's watching, I guess please tell your friends about the show and like and subscribe on whatever channel you're on. Please do hit the like or subscribe buttons and everything. That helps the show and helps us all continue doing this stuff.
So, let's see. So I had one other slide. Let me bring it back up. So I think this is an interesting question because I frequently hear people, there's discussions back and forth about whether you have stealth in space or not. And the submarines in space model, I think, is one that there's a couple notable examples of it happening, but usually you're more likely to see aircraft carriers in space. or surface ship action in space as sort of being the sort of metaphors for how people are thinking about it. Submarines in space is a potentially interesting one, but you don't really see that happening very often. But I think it's interesting what would have to be true for submarines in space to be the right model to think about it. You'd have to have some ability to avoid detection, because that's really how submarines work. Whether you did that by virtue of the fact that space is very big and you're just, you're stealthy, you're hard to be seen, or whether it's something like a cloaking device, that would be, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. But I'm curious as to whether anybody has any thoughts on that.
Well, I guess you'd want to define whatever sensor system you have. I mean, are you limited by the speed of light, or do you have like faster than light sensing capabilities? Because I think the submarine in space, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different assumptions that have to be made one way or the other. But if you have faster than light sensing capabilities, then maybe this works better, because waiting on the visible light for a ship to get to you would mean it would be too late. It would be too slow. So if you have faster than light sensors, you could detect that craft far away, and they would presumably be taking measures to avoid that detection by the faster than light sensors. And so that would probably be a way to hide from faster than light sensors. This probably works. This might work. Yeah. There's a whole pile of assumptions that go with, what I just said too.
There's always a whole pile of assumptions. Yeah. I've often usually when somebody talks about stealth in space, the idea that there is no stealth in space, my response to that is usually that even if that were true, and it's sort of a truism on the internet, but it's a truism that was mostly promulgated by people that don't have physics degrees. Not entirely, but mostly. And in the cases where the people involved did have physics degrees, there was like a pretty interesting discussion that took place on a traveler mailing list some time ago that got cited in other sources. That was specifically within a particular context. But even if you want to say that, if you got enough time, your sensor is going to find everything. The question is, the key thing is, do you have enough time?
Right.
So if your science fiction background is that I have to come in from far out, right? Like I've got a jump point and it's out beyond the orbit of Jupiter. And so I can go basically between, Alpha Centauri and the Sol system in the blink of an eye, but then it takes me 2 weeks to get to Earth from there. Well, then you're going to see them coming, right? You're going to see them coming, and that's just probably the way it's going to be. If it's the case, though, that would also apply to a Star Trek situation where you're not necessarily going to come blazing in, especially into a system that has a lot of infrastructure and ships in it. You're not going to come blazing in at warp 11 because there's stuff you can run into. And so traffic control probably says that you're not going to do that. And Star Trek sensors are ridiculously good to begin with. So no stealth in space there. You're going to see people coming. If I've got a tactically useful FTL drive and my sensors are limited to speed of light, it's not really that they can't detect me if I sit still. It's that I'll never sit still. And so maybe they'll even have some idea I'm there, but they just can't get a targeting solution.
Explain what you mean by a tactically useful FTL drive.
That's a good question. I should explain what I mean by a tactically useful FTL drive. So a lot of FTL drives you see in science fiction are not tactically useful because they, like the Traveler jump drive. You have to be however many 100 diameters out or whatever from the star. And as a result, you drop in beyond the orbit of Jupiter, and then after that, you're not doing FTL stuff, right? You're limited to sort of slogging through real space at whatever acceleration that you can gin up to do that. If your FTL drive allows you to go FTL sort of trivially, right? Like I just turn it on and I turn it off again. And so I can make, I could have a jump drive where I'm making very small jumps. I'm making I just sprint the ship into FTL mode, sort of like the Picard maneuver, right? Where he just goes into FTL briefly.
But you just keep doing it over and over and over again.
If you're able to use your FTL drive in tactical combat, but your sensors are limited to speed of light, it's kind of hard to get a targeting solution on you. One of my favorite science fiction novels series is the Exordium series by Sherwood Smith and Dave Trowbridge, and that's exactly how it works in that universe, where it's really hard to get a targeting lock. You're getting information, but it's all time late, and so you can't really shoot on that information. What you have to do is build up a profile over time, and if you have good algorithms and you're collecting all the sensor data and you've got a good database so that you can do the it's Ramius, he always turns left at the bottom of the hour sort of deal. You can put it all together so that when somebody comes out of jump, you're waiting there with a gun pointed at them.
Actually, the bullets are already on the way, right?
Bullets are already on the way. So I would recommend the movie Equilibrium, which has gun kata. It's the first of the two. Scott Wimmer, is that the director's name? It's the first of the two movies. The second one was Ultraviolet, and it had a much more stylized version of this. But in Equilibrium, Christian Bale, if I remember correctly, is the star of that movie, and he plays a guy who has studied this martial art called gun kata that involves using handguns, and having done statistical analysis of hundreds of gunfights, they know enough about how gunfights develop to be able to be very predictive. So the idea is basically boils down to you shoot at the place where you think the person is going to show up at the time you think he's going to show up there. And so in the Exordium series, a lot of times what they do is they'll drop out of a jump, rotate their orientation to point their skip missile in the right tube, which is basically right direction. Think photon torpedo, faster than light, except it's a ball of plasma energy. It's a plasma weapon. And they'll take the shot before they've got any indication there's somebody there, because their predictive model says that somebody's going to be there. So if you've got, back to the original question, if you've got it set up in such a way, your universe set up in such a way that you can't really use the information you've got because it's always time late, you sort of have a situation that's at least vaguely reminiscent of what you have with submarine combat. And you could argue that that's a type of submarine model. All right, so now I'm looking to see here. Let's see if there's anything. Yeah, somebody made the comment about the BSG Cylon Raider. I've always wondered why in that universe the Galactica didn't die about episode 2 or 3. Because it seems to me the enemy ships have nuclear weapons and tactically useful FTL drives and a resurrection capability, which means that there's absolutely no reason whatsoever not to be a kamikaze.
Not true. They describe it as a really painful process to get resurrected, and after a few times, it starts driving you nuts, and you really hate it. So,
okay, well, okay, yeah, but still, if you can win the war by doing it one more time, you probably would.
Sure, if it was that simple.
Yeah.
More common. We have one instance of a lot of suicidal people flying suicidal airplanes into navies, and it didn't work out. So
Right, but in that case they
don't get
died.
me wrong. There's plenty of reasons why the Cylons were more powerful than one old Battlestar, but
Yeah. And I actually, if they'd actually known what the plan was in advance, they always said they had a plan, but when they finally showed it to us in the movie of that name, it turns out it was really kind of dumb.
I'm not sure I was able to figure out what the plan was. But
I need to go back and rewatch.
Yeah.
But if you have, I would love to have seen an episode take place maybe around episode 6 or 7, where they've got a chance to sort of sit back and catch their breath about all this stuff. Because one of the things that people forget about that show is that, we're seeing it over a period of weeks, but like the first season is like the first 10 weeks after the attack. So it's just one thing right after another. Boom, 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 boom. So if you, once they got a chance to catch their breath just a little bit, I'd love to see a conversation between Adama and Ty where one of them says, "Why aren't we dead yet? Because given how badly they outmatch us, we should be dead. Why aren't we dead yet?" And have the fact that they're not dead yet be sort of the thing that leads them into realizing that there's something going on that they don't understand, and that they got to figure that out to figure out what's going on with the Cylons.
Yeah, so Phil Banks, he mentions in here that Ronald D. Moore has gone on record as saying the line "they have a plan" was his biggest mistake in the entire series. So
yeah, I can see that. It would have been okay if they actually did have a plan, as opposed to this, we're going to make it up later.
Yeah.
There's a couple of series that have done we're going to act like we've got an idea, but we're just going to kind of make it up as we go along. And as near as I can tell, the 3 series that come to mind on that off the top of my head are Battlestar Galactica, Lost, and X-Files. And I think X-Files is really the only one where you can make the argument that it kind of worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't really watch the X-Files, so
I kind of watched the X-Files. I didn't really watch Lost.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either, actually.
But from what I understand in Lost, they made it.
They killed the pilots in the first episode, so I lost interest.
Yeah, they kept throwing stuff in to make it seem like there's this big idea that they were working towards, when in reality it's like, let's just put some weird shit in and we'll figure it out later.
Yeah, it's dangling a carrot to get you to watch the next week. So
yeah.
Hey, one person mentions in here that gravity would make a detectable wave. At what speed does gravity travel? I believe that is at the speed of light. Is the current thinking on that? So yeah, and as Andy mentioned, I think we have satellites that can detect that now. So, but I don't know the state. I don't know the actual state. I would look that up on the internet, and I'm sure Wikipedia would have the correct answer.
Yes. As Pat alluded to the fact that there's been a 3-way conversation, well, mostly a 2-way conversation with me just sort of watching it, between Andy and Pat and I today, Andy Presby and Pat and I today, about what exactly is the observable signature of a jump in Battlestar Galactica.
As in, how detectable is it when a ship jumps into a system and stuff? Obviously, if it's right out your window, you can see it. But if it's, say, outside visual range, or the other end of the star system, are you going to detect it or not?
Yeah, and I think I remember seeing that there's generally sort of a bright flash that happens. But
yeah,
the question is, how big a deal is that?
Right. How far does that actually go? So, And one of the other things Andy had mentioned, they had, what is the Blackbird, the stealth reconnaissance ship. Well, presumably it wouldn't be that stealthy if it appears and it's immediately detected and shot down. So I'm guessing that that was good further evidence. I think that the Flash is really small and not really any more detectable than the ship that just appeared there.
Well, although the response to that, which I didn't give earlier today, is that's a really small ship.
It is, and yeah, and maybe the Flash is exponential. Who knows, right? How detectable something is goes
Even
up.
Even if it's straight proportional, you've got the thing that's 30 feet long versus the thing that's like, how long do we think a Battlestar is?
It's 1.44 kilometers.
Yeah,
give or take a meter.
The fact that you know that is so scary.
Actually, it's the only reason is I was just looking through this book the other day, yesterday.
Oh, that's the new one from
Eagle Moss.
Yeah, mine is sitting on my couch, but I haven't actually really looked through it yet.
We were having a little discussion about that, and let me see if I can pull that up right there. So anyway, 1.44, and then we've got the Pegasus down there, and it says 1.79 kilometers. So for the Pegasus. So apparently it's official. Eagle Moss is never wrong.
Yeah, I'll tell you, just as we're nearing the end here, and you guys are welcome to continue, but I'm going to tell you two quick stories here about Battlestar. Since you've been talking about Battlestar Galactica. One is I was on set. I was working on set for 3 months, and it was the 3 months that they were filming the plan. And I've told the story how one day I had to give Robert Picardo, the doctor from Voyager, I had to give him a tour of the facilities, him and his friends, a tour of the sets and everything, because his friends were big Battlestar fans. Anyway, we're walking by one of the stages where they were filming, and Dean Stockwell walks out. And Bob Picardo was like, "Oh my God, that's Dean Stockwell." He says, "Hey, Alec, can you introduce me?" So, okay. And I'm like, "Yeah," because I'm a big Battlestar guy. So I walk over and say, "Hey, Mr. Stockwell, I'd like to introduce you to Bob Picardo. He's, an actor as well." And or whatever I said. And Bob introduces it. "Hi, my name's, Bob Picardo. I'm a big fan." And Dean Stockwell had no idea who Bob Picardo was. Mm-hmm. None whatsoever. And at that point, Dean was a little, I don't know. I mean, he smoked a lot and all. But anyway, I thought that was funny. But the other thing on Battlestar Galactica was the first day I got there, I got to walk through all the studios. They showed me through all the studios and all the sets. And we're walking down the corridor, and then they go, "Okay, well, let's go to the bridge." And the bridge was next door. And I go, so we go to the bridge, and I'm going, "Okay, wait a second. How did you shoot the scene in the first episode in the pilot where you track all the way down the hallway? You're tracking Adama all the way down the hallway, and he goes down the hallway and turns right into CIC." I said, "How did you shoot that? Because that set's over there." And it turns out that all the sets were built on North Shore Studios in Vancouver for the pilot. And then the pilot was over. They literally took all the sets, put them in storage. And when the show was renewed, they went to Vancouver Studios on the other side of on Vancouver proper, and rebuilt everything there, and obviously separated those two sets.
Oh, okay.
But I think the idea, when you see these sets, you realize that they tore all those sets down, put them in storage, and then rebuilt them again. That's Hollywood movie.
Like a lot of work. Yeah.
Did they do it during a tornado?
I don't think so, because I don't think they get many tornadoes in Vancouver.
Okay.
One of the advantages of Canada and not Kansas.
or Atlanta.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for those who haven't heard the story, I was visiting the set, and we're in the process of trying to figure out how to put together the captain's quarters, when all of a sudden all of our phones go off because there's a tornado warning. And so we had this conversation. We're in a building that's basically a concrete slab. There is no basement. And so we're having the conversation about whether we should go seek shelter. And I finally said, screw it. If my tombstone reads, died while killed by a tornado while assembling a Star Trek set, I'm okay with that. At which point we stopped talking about the tornado and we went back to work.
And ironically, yesterday we disassembled the bunk portion of that set. We just moved it to the side because we need that. We're renting out that space. But we were talking about that day when we all put that set together.
We put it all together, and then we went, oh shit, we're about 8 inches too far in this direction, and we tore it all down, and then we put it back together again.
And we still built it in the wrong spot in the studio. We should have built it farther over. But anyway, the problem was that we thought that the set was a square, and it wasn't a square.
Yeah, it took us forever to figure out that it's a pie piece, right? Because it's a saucer, so it's a pie piece. And so all these walls that we thought were parallel are not parallel. And when we stopped trying to make them parallel, everything fit a lot better.
And you were like, oh, wow, this actually works.
So I take it these didn't come with instructions, huh?
No. Well, they'd been disassembled like 2 years previously.
Okay. And now this time, believe me, Dana, as we were disassembling, it was like drawing numbers on it and everything. So we know exactly, where everything goes.
Yeah. And I say we when we took it all down and moved it over like 2 feet, it took us 2 hours to get to that point, but then moving it the 2 feet over took a half hour.
Yeah, because we knew everything. We knew where everything went. We're like, okay, zip, unscrewed, move, zip, screwed it back up.
Yeah, and so that was pretty much a well-oiled machine at that part. We weren't having to go over to the other side of the space and go like, all right, what's this thing? Where do we think this goes?
Yeah. Well, and at the October shoot last year, I had Steve Dixon and Paul Osborne spearheaded, literally cataloging every set piece that we have, every wall piece and wall panel and everything, which will come in handy when we move and build a new studio. Because we're already talking about how big a studio do we need and what sets can we build and so on and so forth. And of course, we're also eyeing making all the sets interchangeable. Not interchangeable is the wrong word. We want to make it so that we can add pieces to the sets to get different looks. For example, when we're talking about using this for the Orville fan film, we're like, what can we do to the bridge to make it look different? Well, different captain's chair, different pilot's console, take out tactical and fleet ops, put in, certain bulkheads and things like that, besides changing all the monitors and what have you. So we're thinking of those things as moving forward to be able to give different looks to these sets.
So I've been watching the Orville recently. I watched the first 3 episodes of the second season by accident. I thought I was putting in season 1, and by the time I figured it out, I was on the couch with a cat taking a nap on me. And then I've watched, I think, the first 5 episodes of season 1. There's a lot to like in that show. I really like their display. I'm gonna go to the very minor little thing first. Their computer displays, I think, are much more functional than what we see in, say, Next Generation. I love the sort of overall aesthetic of those Federation displays, but oh my God, it would drive me crazy if I actually had to use a computer that displayed data like that. Mm-hmm. It's like the most inefficient way possible. Whereas I think the Orville displays actually look like they're pretty functional. I've concluded I can't say enough good things about the Orville. I really do like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great show.
When does season 3 start?
Next year sometime.
Oh, really? We've already been waiting a year. That's ridiculous. But
yeah. So Pat, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a pandemic.
Well,
everything shut down.
I suppose. Yes, I know. We get to wear masks every day in the sim, so that's joyous.
One of the things, I spent a week in a secret vault this past week, having to wear a mask the entire time, and most of the time not violating the number of people who were in the room, who were supposed to be in the room, most of the time. I did notice that there's one episode that has both Robert Picardo and John Billingsley. Is that
yes, John Billingsley. Yep.
And Robert Picardo plays a doctor. That's a great episode.
Yeah, that was a good one. And I think we see some progress from season 1 to season 2 in the quality of the show. There's a little bit of that less awkward attempts at humor that there were at the beginning.
Once I interpret that as they had the show and it was working, and so they didn't have to lie to Fox anymore and tell them it was a comedy.
Right, exactly.
Well, I think also the second season, I particularly like the fact that they toned the comedy down in the second season.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's usually still a couple chuckles in an episode.
Oh, sure.
But you're not just doing gags for the sake of doing gags. So
exactly. So awesome. Well, good. Well, listen, thank you all. We appreciate it. Pat, thanks for hosting tonight.
Absolutely.
That was awesome. Any idea what we're going to talk about next week, guys?
At this point, no. Chris and I will have to sit down and talk. I don't know if there's anything in particular that somebody needs or wants to know. We can go through that. No, Chris and I will have to sit down and talk and see what we can come up with. We've kind of run through a lot of stuff, so we'll figure something out.
All right, and I'll let you guys know, Patrick, you may host again. We are moving out on Monday. The movers come, and we are moving into a hotel for a week or so because of closings and this that. So we're literally staying in a hotel until we can move into a temporary apartment until we close on our house. So,
yep, I've had moves go that way too.
Oh God!
Yeah.
But fortunately, I'm actually looking at the hotel as a break. It's a Residence Inn. We got 2 rooms because you can only have 2 dogs in a room, so we have 4 dogs. So I'm actually like, oh wow, this is going to be nice. There's not going to be a gaming computer around to distract me. It's going to be me and my laptop. I'm going to get so much work done, and then during the day we're going to this studio. So
yeah,
I'll keep you guys posted. But I want to thank you as always.
Are you setting up the hotel rooms as like one is the work room, one is the non-work room?
It'll probably default that way. Like we'll sleep in one room, but the other room will be like, I'm going to take the 2 dogs who don't make any noise that can sleep on the bed while I'm at the computer working. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So I guess the short answer is yes, you're right. That's exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And also just working, I literally took everything. Like when we moved the perk fulfillment here to my basement, there was nothing to it. It was just like all the patches and T-shirts we had, and some posters, but we've collected so much stuff that we're selling over the past year that we moved everything back. Plus, we moved all the stuff, just all the crap in this house that needs to go on eBay, and now the studio's busting at the seams. So we can't wait to get in there and start posting stuff on eBay and shipping perks to fans and donors and get out our latest Kickstarter. Oh, and by the way, I will point out to everyone, I will mention to everyone, we have a Kickstarter going. And if you go to Kickstarter, and let's see if I can get the URL real fast. If you go to Kickstarter and search for Axanar, the Axanar, here it is, the Axanar MSD poster collection is, I think we got 1 day, what do we got? 46 hours to go. And we're just shy of $5,000 on it. But take a look, if you will. Here, I'm posting the link. It's all the MSD for posters, 11 by 17-inch posters for all the other ships. The Triton class, the Magellan class, the Korolev class. There's 4 posters, a top view of the Korolev as well. You can get the Ares and the Geronimo, which we issued previously, and also 2 posters of monitor graphics from the bridge. So it's all really cool stuff. All the money goes to support the studio. So please take a look at that and please support us. There you go. And thanks so much, guys. Chris Weave, as always, you are the mastermind. Patrick, thank you so much. How's the training going? The simulating going there, Patrick?
Oh, it's great. I mean, that's the best job in the world. So yeah, I love this. I love the job. Yeah, no, get to train students, train new students, get to train the, and then work with some of the older hands and sometimes get to learn something from them. So yeah, it's a great job. Love it.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you next week, Saturday, for Starship Tactical. Tomorrow we get back to, there may or may not be, because I'll be moving Axanar After Dark tomorrow. I'll let you know how far behind I am. If not, we'll notify you there. So thank you so much. And to Baba David, will there ever be a new Axanar? Yes, we are working on it. We have shot 3 days so far. So it is coming out next year. So stay tuned. In the meantime, thank you everyone for your support. We look forward to seeing you guys next weekend for Starship Tactical. Thanks so much. Take care.
Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.